Hello everyone, my name is Sasha Ahern and welcome to Unit 3, Topic 6, which is Communism. So first we are going to talk about Russia and communism, which was started by the Russian Revolution in 1917. The primary reason for the Russian Revolution was weak autocratic rule. Before communism, Russia was led by a monarchy, and the particular monarch at the time was named Nicholas II, and he was not a particularly strong monarch. Therefore, a lot of people were suffering under the autocratic rule, and a lot of people were excited for change. Additionally, Russia had lost the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, and this led to a lot of people beginning to distrust the monarchy quite a lot. Also, Russia was involved in World War I and actually suffered a lot from it. They had the highest death count out of any other country in World War I. So a lot of Russian citizens were very concerned and confused why Russia was still in the war when they weren't getting anything out of it and they were suffering so greatly from it. The monarchy kind of tried to resolve these problems by establishing the Duma, which is kind of like a parliamentary system that would include the citizens a bit more in the government. However, it didn't work because anytime the Duma tried to propose something that the monarchy didn't like, they would just disregard the idea and disband and dissolve the Duma. So this kind of all culminated in the March Revolution of 1917, when city workers from the major cities in Russia rose up and began to tear down the monarchy. And so the monarchy collapses, and in its place is established the Duma Provisional Government, which is kind of a weak government. So it ends up ruling in tandem with the Bolshevik Party, or the Communist Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, and generally the Soviet Bolshevik Party was what had the power during this time. Finally, in November of 1917, the Bolshevik Party officially and formally takes over. So this leads to the establishment of the world's first communist state, with Lenin as the world's first communist dictator. Finally, Russia pulls out of World War I. However, the bloodshed does not stop there. This prompts a civil war between the Duma, or the White Army, and the Bolsheviks, or the Red Army, which lasts 2 years and results in 15 million deaths and the official establishment of the world's first Soviet or communist state. So now we are going to talk about Joseph Stalin. He led the Soviet Union after Vladimir Lenin died. So during the revolution, he was generating money for the communist cause through criminal and illegal means. And after the Soviet Union was established and Vladimir Lenin rose to power, he was busy consolidating power as the general secretary of the Communist Party. Now, this isn't a particularly strong position, nor is it one that holds a lot of power, and a lot of people actually thought that he was quite stupid and didn't think that he would make much of himself. So this he used to his advantage and was able to consolidate a lot of power, and basically by the time that he was ready to establish himself as dictator, no one was strong enough or powerful enough to stop him. He tried to do a few things during his reign of terror as the communist dictator of the Soviet Union. Primarily, he wanted to kind of modernize and industrialize Russia. His idea was that since a lot of the rest of the world, the European nations, thought of Russia as a very backwards thinking country, he wanted to prove them wrong. However, this completely backfired in a famine that killed millions of people across Russia, and particularly a lot in Ukraine. A lot of historians are debating whether or not this can be classified as a genocide and how tactical that famine was for Stalin. So this is called the Holodomor genocide. He also ruled with an iron fist and used gulags to control his people, which were essentially work camps which he could send anyone who disagreed with him to. He also positively helped defeat Hitler, along with the other Allied powers, in World War II. So now we are going to talk about Chinese communism, and this started with the Chinese Civil War, which lasted from 1945 to 1949. Similarly to Russia, China was struggling to modernize as well. So China had been using a serfdom or a peasant system for a very long time, and a lot of other parts of the world thought of this as very backwards because it didn't allow for great social mobility, and it kept the social structure of Chinese life very rigid. So a lot of countries, particularly in the Western world and Japan, tried to basically colonize parts of China in the early 20th century. As you can see now, in the 1940s, Japan is occupying a lot of Chinese territory. So this prompts the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is basically a fight between the Chinese government, the Chinese nationalists, and the Chinese rebel groups, the Chinese communists, working together to fight Japan and kind of kick them out of occupation. It's pretty well known between these two groups that as soon as Japan is kicked out and the common enemy is gotten rid of, these two groups are going to fight it out for power over the new China. So this war ended up with the Republic of China, which was the nationalist government, falling, and the People's Republic of China, which was the communist government, being established by Mao, and we'll talk a little bit more about him, in 1949. And this is the same Chinese government that is in effect today. This resulted in 5 million civilian deaths and many, many more soldier deaths. A small group of nationalists flee to seek refuge in Taiwan, and this is actually the only Chinese government that the US agrees exists or acknowledges that it exists until the 1970s. During the Chinese Civil War, the United States had been kind of assisting the nationalists by giving them money and arms and things like that. However, in 1949, President Truman realizes that there's pretty much no hope for the nationalists at this point, and in an attempt to kind of pull the United States out of the war and kind of clear the US's name to not have the rise of communism in China on their hands, he publishes the White Papers, which essentially just pull the United States out of the Civil War. This doesn't work well, and a lot of people still see the failure of China becoming communist as a part of the United States. But then we don't recognize the People's Republic of China as a country all the way up until 1970. And this was a conflict over system of government between a communist dictatorship and a social democracy. This conflict can be seen very apparently in the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. This happened between North Korea, which was being basically supported by China and the Soviet Union, and South Korea, which was being supported by the United States. And these two countries were battling it out on the peninsula, and this is important because this is some of the first fighting, like actual fighting, that we see in the Cold War. And this doesn't get a lot of media attention from the United States, mostly because we don't want this to escalate into another world war, and the threat of nuclear war is obviously very much on everyone's minds at this time in the middle of the Cold War. So now we are going to talk about Mao Zedong, who was the communist leader and dictator during the time he was alive. So before the establishment of the People's Republic of China, he was one of the founding members of the Chinese Communist Party, joining in 1921. He believed that the revolution would start with the peasants. This was contrary to the belief of the Soviet Union and a lot of other Chinese communist revolutionaries who thought that similarly to the Russian Revolution, it would start with the workers in the cities. However, this did influence a lot of his battle tactics and battle strategies of trying to control the peasants and the farmland before attacking the cities. He took control of the party in 1935 by kind of just declaring it so, and then led the republic from the time that it was founded until 1959, and then again later on in his life. This is a nice quote from Mao that I really like. Before he joined the Chinese Communist Party, before any of this, when he was kind of just studying and learning about communism, he says, "The world is ours, the nation is ours, society is ours. If we do not speak, who will speak? If we do not act, who will act?" There are a few important things that I would like to bring to light about his rule, some very important moments. Firstly, we have the Sino-Soviet split in 1956. This was when China and Russia broke ties due to having conflicting forms of communism. And the conflicting forms of communism was mostly just about foreign policy, as Russia was now led by Khrushchev. They didn't want to kind of be conquering countries anymore in the name of communism, but China very much did. So they were having a conflict over that. This brought confusion to a lot of the Western world because they had kind of seen communism as one like unit, and this kind of proved that it wasn't as unified as they had thought. This also turned the bipolar Cold War between Russia and the United States into a tripolar Cold War between China, Russia, and the United States. Another important thing he did was the Great Leap Forward, and this was Mao's attempt to modernize and industrialize China. However, similarly to Stalin, it failed miserably and led to the starvation of many, many people in his country. He was actually removed from power by a lot of other Chinese communist leaders in 1959 due to the Great Leap's failure. However, then, just 7 years later, he leads a cultural revolution, a movement led by Mao to try to regain power. And this was him along with his Red Guards, which were essentially like his young communist soldier youth. And basically his goal was to just kill anyone and purify communism by killing anyone who disagreed with him and his form of communism. This resulted in 1.5 million deaths and Mao becoming the leader for the rest of his time living. In his later years, he built a lot of connections with the United States and Europe. Realizing that he no longer had Russia as an ally, he reached out to the United States and famously met with President Richard Nixon in 1972 to mend the two countries' disagreements. Lastly, I'm going to answer a guiding question. Did Americans have a good reason to fear communism? I'd say yes, and also the things that stemmed from a result of communism, like the two systems of government fighting over each other and leading to a tripolar Cold War, which is obviously very, very scary. However, it could have also been handled significantly better by the United States, in my opinion, in ways that do not kind of like perpetuate the terror and hysteria in the United States, in ways that would have saved a lot of people's livelihoods. But that's for the next unit, so stay tuned. Thank you. Do you have any questions?